You never forget the day your dignity is questioned, not because of something you did wrong, but because of who you are. For Maya James, that day came on an ordinary Tuesday. She had walked into the tall glass building with confidence, pride, and her natural crown, her afro, coiled in full, reflecting the heritage she carried in her blood. But in a boardroom filled with suits and rehearsed smiles, that same crown became a silent target. Maya was 24 years old, full of ambition, and freshly hired as a junior marketing analyst at a corporate giant known as Artonics. Her first week had been promising. She had ideas, big ones. She stayed late, worked hard, and always showed up prepared. Her work spoke louder than her words, and that should have been enough. But it wasn't. On her 7th day at the job, her manager, a middle-aged woman named Deborah, called her into a small conference room. With blinds half closed and the fluorescent lights humming above, Maya was asked to tone it down. "Your hair is distracting," Deborah said, trying to make it sound like a professional concern. "Distracting to whom?" Maya asked, her voice calm but her heart pounding. Deborah looked away. "It's not a good fit with the company image. Maybe consider straightening it. More polished." Maya blinked. That word again, polished. As if her natural self wasn't already enough. She tried to push past it. She came in the next day just as she was, natural, proud, unbothered. But the atmosphere changed. Suddenly, the same people who once complimented her ideas now avoided eye contact. She was removed from client meetings. Her suggestions were overlooked. 2 weeks later, she was fired. The email read, "Due to cultural misalignment and team compatibility concerns, your role is being terminated effective immediately." Cultural misalignment, a phrase carefully chosen to mask bias with bureaucracy. Maya packed her things slowly, but her tears didn't fall until she stepped into the elevator. Not because she lost her job, but because, once again, someone tried to make her feel like she had to shrink herself to survive. She went home broken, but not beaten. In the days that followed, Maya turned inward. She remembered her grandmother's voice telling her, "They'll try to strip you, baby, but your roots go deeper than they'll ever understand." So, she began to rebuild. She wrote about her experience online. At first, it was just a small blog post, but it resonated. Thousands of women, black, brown, curly-haired, natural queens, flooded her inbox with their own stories of discrimination. She realized this wasn't just about her hair. It was about being told she didn't belong because she didn't conform. So she decided to do something bold. Maya founded a small brand called Crown and Confidence, a platform dedicated to celebrating natural beauty and empowering women of color in the corporate world. She started with hair care tips, empowerment blogs, then workshops and seminars. Within a year, her brand gained national attention. Meanwhile, Artonics was facing a storm. Whispers began to circulate about a toxic internal culture. Former employees stepped forward. Maya's post had created a ripple effect. Discrimination lawsuits piled up. Their public image, once spotless, began to crack. Then came the expose. A major media outlet picked up Maya's story. They tied it to a pattern of systemic bias inside Artonics. Shareholders panicked. Clients began to distance themselves. Sponsors pulled back. And just like that, what had once been a billion-dollar company began to bleed. 2 years after Maya was fired, Artonics announced massive layoffs. 3 years later, they filed for bankruptcy. Poetic, isn't it? The same company that told Maya her hair didn't belong, couldn't survive without integrity. But Maya? She was just getting started. She stood on TEDx stages. She wrote a best-selling book. She hired women who once felt invisible in boardrooms. She turned rejection into a revolution. And it all started because someone dared to underestimate her. Maya often said, "Sometimes God will let you be rejected, not because you're unworthy, but because you're being redirected to something greater." And greater it was. Her brand, Crown and Confidence, was no longer just a side project. It had transformed into a full-scale empowerment empire. With each month, her audience grew. Women who had been overlooked, silenced, or told they were too much finally had a space to be enough. But Maya didn't let the fame get to her head. She stayed grounded. She remembered what it felt like to walk out of that building, carrying both her purse and the weight of injustice. That memory kept her fire alive. She began speaking at universities, especially HBCUs, where young black students felt inspired by her courage. They can fire you from a job, she told a graduating class, but they can't fire your purpose. Her words lit a spark in people. She reminded them that being authentic wasn't a liability. It was a superpower. Still, some nights were hard. Even after the success, she'd lie awake wondering, why did I have to go through that? Why was my hair, of all things, the reason for my dismissal? And then, one night, as she scrolled through emails from women saying she changed their lives, the answer became clear. You went through it so others wouldn't have to. Meanwhile, back at what remained of Artonics, the CEO resigned. The HR director who signed Maya's termination letter was now under investigation. And Deborah, the same woman who asked her to straighten her hair, was laid off quietly, her name never appearing in another press release. The collapse wasn't sudden. It was like a slow leak from the inside. Investors lost trust. The culture they once bragged about was now under scrutiny. Competitors took over their contracts. Former employees spilled details in interviews, podcasts, and panels. What had been hidden for years was now public. But Maya didn't dance on their downfall. No, she never named the company publicly. She never called out Deborah directly. Because Maya knew something deeper. Dignity always wins in the end. She stayed focused on building up, not tearing down. And it paid off. Within 5 years, Crown and Confidence had partnered with Fortune 500 companies, helping them reform their diversity practices. Maya became a trusted consultant for changing corporate cultures, not by shaming, but by educating. It was poetic justice. This same corporate world that once said she didn't belong was now paying her to help them do better. One moment in particular stood out. A young woman named Sierra reached out through Instagram. She had just started her first job and was told by a supervisor that her braids were too urban. She felt crushed. She wanted to quit, but she found Maya's story online. She watched her TED Talk. She read her book. And instead of quitting, she walked in the next day, head high, and filed a formal complaint. HR took it seriously because the company had just signed on with Crown and Confidence for cultural training. Maya's story had saved her, and there were hundreds more just like it. Maya didn't become a CEO because she wanted power. She became one because she wanted change. She built something so real, so personal, so needed, that even people who once denied her existence could no longer ignore her impact. And what about the hairstyle that started it all? She wore it proudly. In every photo shoot, every panel, every interview. Her afro, her coils, her natural crown, untamed and glorious, became a symbol of defiance, healing, and grace. Years later, during an interview with a national morning show, the host asked, "Do you think you'd go back in time and change how you handled it if you had the chance?" Maya smiled gently. "No, I wouldn't change a thing, because the pain they gave me was the seed of purpose. And look what grew from it." The host was silent for a moment. The audience clapped softly. Maya adjusted her mic, brushed her curls back, and added, "They fired me thinking they were closing a door. What they didn't know was I was the architect of my own building." Maya had built a legacy, but her journey was never about fame or wealth. It was about impact. She had taken something that nearly destroyed her and transformed it into a platform to empower others. And the world was taking notice. As the years passed, Crown and Confidence became more than just a brand. It was a movement. Its influence stretched from corporate boardrooms to grassroots organizations, all advocating for inclusivity, authenticity, and self-love. Maya's story had become a beacon for countless women, not just black women, but anyone who had ever been told they were too much or not enough. But Maya remained humble, remembering her roots. One of the most defining moments in her journey happened during an annual awards gala, where she was invited to accept the Cultural Impact Award. As she stood on the stage, looking out at the sea of people who had supported her, her thoughts flashed back to that day in the office when she was told to choose between her job and her hair. That very decision had cost her her job, but it had granted her the freedom to be who she truly was. I stand here today, Maya began her speech, not as a victim, but as a living testament to the power of authenticity. We've been taught that conformity is the key to success, but I'm here to tell you, your truth is your superpower. The room erupted in applause. It wasn't just Maya they were applauding, it was the thousands of people who had found the courage to show up as their true selves, no matter the consequences. Her voice resonated even further when she partnered with the world's largest fashion and beauty influencers, launching a campaign called #CrownYourConfidence. The campaign was a celebration of individuality, encouraging people to embrace their natural hair, body, and essence. But her greatest influence was felt in the stories of everyday people. Maya received letters, emails, and messages from women who had faced similar challenges. Hair discrimination, job rejection, feeling inadequate because their appearance didn't fit societal standards. One letter that particularly stood out was from a woman named Lisa, a high school teacher in a predominantly white district. Lisa had been told by her principal that her natural hair was unprofessional and was advised to straighten it for parent-teacher conferences. Lisa hesitated, but Maya's message inspired her to stand firm. She didn't straighten her hair. Instead, she wore it in an even more bold, intricate style, and when she walked into that conference room, she held her head higher than ever before. Parents and colleagues complimented her, not on the professionalism of her hair, but on the strength of her spirit. She felt free. Maya's influence spread far beyond her initial goals, but there was still the matter of Artonics, the company that had fired her. People wondered what happened behind the scenes. How could a company that once seemed so dominant crumble so quickly? It was no surprise to Maya. The culture at Artonics had been built on exclusion and intolerance. The same company that fired her for her natural hair was now struggling to hold its ground in the corporate world, especially in an age where diversity was no longer a buzzword but a requirement. Investors and clients who had supported the company for years began pulling out, and the media started asking hard questions about its history of discriminatory practices. Then, one fateful day, a former Artonics employee reached out to Maya with a story that shed light on just how deep the issues ran. The whistleblower, someone who had been with the company since its early days, shared how the leadership had always held a narrow view of what success looked like, favoring only those who conformed to their rigid standards. They didn't care about talent, the former employee said. They only cared about who fit their image of what a person should be. It was no surprise that the company had been founded on such discriminatory principles, but it was tragic to see how those principles led to its downfall. The more people learned about the toxic work culture, the more public opinion turned against Artonics. Maya took a deep breath when she read the full story. She'd never felt the need to bash the company or those involved, but the truth was undeniable. The world was changing. People could no longer tolerate environments that suppressed individuality. It was a turning point for Maya. She began to feel a shift, not just in the business world, but in herself. Her mission had never been to see Artonics fail, but watching it unfold confirmed something she had known all along. Truth always comes to light. And with the collapse of Artonics, Maya's message reached a broader audience. The company's demise only underscored what she had been saying for years. When people are free to express their true selves, they can thrive, but when they are forced into a mold, it only stifles growth. The media was relentless in covering the rise and fall of Artonics, but instead of focusing on the drama, they also turned their spotlight on Maya. They highlighted her success and the values she stood for. She became the voice for those who were often silenced. Her story intertwined with every narrative of triumph over adversity. As Maya's story continued to unfold, the question many asked was, what's next for her? In a world where success is often measured by one's next big move, Maya refused to conform to that pressure. She had learned long ago that life is not a race, but a journey, one that should be walked with intention, passion, and grace. Maya's next chapter came in the form of a documentary. She had been approached by a prominent film director who was fascinated by her transformation from an outcast to an influencer. The idea was simple yet profound. How did a black woman's natural hair become the symbol of cultural revolution? This documentary, titled Crowned: The Power of Self-Expression, was released to critical acclaim. It captured Maya's journey, not just from the perspective of her own experiences, but also through the lens of those who had walked similar paths, individuals who had faced discrimination based on their appearance, ethnicity, or identity. The film resonated deeply with audiences, especially those who had been marginalized in various ways. Maya's personal story, intertwined with narratives from others who had fought their own battles, showed the power of resilience. But more importantly, the documentary revealed the transformative power of reclaiming one's identity. As the film gained traction, it caught the attention of major cultural institutions and activists across the globe. Maya was invited to speak at conferences, appear on talk shows, and collaborate with well-known social justice organizations. She was now not only a symbol of defiance, but a catalyst for change, a woman whose voice had risen from silence to become one of the most influential in her generation. But with all the attention, Maya's true mission remained grounded in community. She knew that real change didn't happen from the top down. It happened when individuals, together, created a movement. So, she launched a nonprofit organization called Crowned in Confidence, designed to support young black women who wanted to pursue their dreams without sacrificing their sense of self. The foundation provided mentorship, scholarships, and leadership programs, all centered around empowering young women to embrace their uniqueness. Maya often spoke at local schools and universities, telling her story of overcoming adversity and reminding them that they were worthy of space in the world just as they were. One of the most powerful initiatives within the organization was the Natural Hair Empowerment Workshops, where women could come together to share their stories, learn about hair care, and most importantly, celebrate their beauty in all its forms. These workshops became an important space for healing, where women not only learned how to care for their hair, but also how to embrace their inner strength. The ripple effect of Maya's work was undeniable. People who had once been ashamed of their natural hair, those who had been told they were unprofessional, unkempt, or unworthy, now found solace in each other's stories. The workshops grew in popularity, and Maya found herself traveling the world to lead these events, creating a global movement that celebrated the beauty of self-expression. Meanwhile, Artonics, the company that had once been so integral to her life, continued to unravel. The news of its decline reached a peak when the company's executives were called to testify before Congress regarding their business practices. Investigations revealed a pattern of discriminatory policies and actions that had been brushed aside for years, policies that hurt countless employees and customers, particularly those from marginalized communities. It was a bittersweet moment for Maya. She had no desire to see people lose their livelihoods, but the company's actions had never been aligned with the values of justice and inclusivity that she held dear. And now, the reckoning had arrived. Artonics had to pay the price for its lack of accountability, just as the world had learned to demand of those in power. Through all of this, Maya remained a steady voice of compassion and wisdom. She chose not to celebrate the downfall of her former employer, but to highlight the importance of growth and accountability. In interviews, she often said, "The downfall of a company isn't a victory. It's a lesson. It's a reminder that the world will no longer tolerate injustice, even if it comes wrapped in a shiny package." Maya's influence expanded beyond corporate boardrooms. Her message reached artists, musicians, and writers, inspiring a new wave of creatives who were proud to express themselves without the fear of judgment. And the beauty industry, once dominated by Eurocentric standards, began to evolve. Major brands began to embrace natural hairstyles, creating a more inclusive marketplace. It was a slow process, but the shift was tangible. As her platform grew, Maya began to collaborate with other like-minded individuals to spearhead policies for workplace diversity and inclusion. She worked with legal teams to help draft laws that would protect individuals from discrimination based on appearance, particularly regarding natural hair. The Crown Act, which stood for Creating a Respectful and Open World for Natural Hair, gained traction, and soon after, it passed in multiple states. The law made it illegal for employers and schools to discriminate against individuals for wearing natural hairstyles, and it was a significant win for Maya and the entire community she had created. She was no longer just a woman with a story. She had become an advocate for systemic change. Maya's journey had begun with a single act of defiance, a woman fired for wearing her natural hair proudly. But that small act had snowballed into something much larger. Her story became a symbol of what happens when we stand up for what's right, even in the face of adversity. It was proof that no one's story is too small to make a difference, and that authenticity always wins in the end. As the years passed, Maya's movement only gained momentum. What had started as a personal journey, rooted in reclaiming her hair, had grown into a powerful cultural revolution. Maya was not just advocating for natural hair, but for the freedom to exist unapologetically in a world that often demanded conformity. In the wake of the success of Crown and Confidence, Maya's philosophy became more widely accepted, especially in the workplace. Many young Black professionals began to wear their natural hairstyles proudly. What was once seen as a bold statement became the norm, a testament to the power of grassroots movements. The Crown Act, once a small piece of legislation, began to spread across the United States and beyond. It became a rallying cry for people of all races and backgrounds who had been silenced for far too long. The law was not just about protecting natural hair. It was about standing against any form of discrimination, whether based on appearance, ethnicity, or identity. It was about creating a space where people could be their authentic selves and still thrive in their careers. Maya's voice in this battle remained unwavering, but with her newfound visibility came an increased responsibility. She wasn't just speaking for herself anymore. She was the voice for thousands, if not millions, of people who had been told their appearance was not good enough. The weight of this responsibility was heavy, but Maya never wavered in her commitment to see the work through. Maya's success, however, wasn't without its challenges. As her profile continued to rise, she encountered resistance from those who still held on to outdated notions about professionalism and beauty. Some critics even accused her of distracting from important issues, trying to elevate something as superficial as hair above more pressing matters. But Maya's response was always the same. It's never just about hair. For her, it was a symbol of something larger, of self-expression, freedom, and the right to exist in a world that often tried to suppress the very essence of who people were. She knew that changing hearts and minds was a long-term battle, and no amount of criticism would stop her from continuing the fight. She often said, "Our identity is more than our appearance, but how we choose to present ourselves is a reflection of the freedom we possess. When society tells us to hide or alter who we are, it robs us of that freedom. We cannot be free until we embrace our whole selves unapologetically." In the midst of her activism, Maya remained grounded by the people who had supported her from the beginning, her family, friends, and fellow advocates. They had witnessed her growth from a woman fired for her natural hair to an international symbol of resilience. But the journey had not been easy. Maya had faced moments of doubt, moments where she questioned whether her efforts were truly making a difference. However, she never gave up on her vision. One of the things that kept her moving forward was the countless messages she received from young women, telling her that her story had inspired them to embrace their natural beauty. For Maya, there was no greater reward than knowing her work had impacted real lives. In her own life, Maya had also found a sense of peace. As she began to establish deeper connections with others in the activism space, she also took the time to nurture her own well-being. The journey of self-acceptance wasn't just about the external world. It was about healing and cultivating an inner peace that reflected the authenticity she now carried with her. She found herself speaking at universities, conferences, and corporate summits, where the conversation had shifted. Companies, once reluctant to embrace diversity in appearance, began to see the value of inclusive beauty standards. One such company, the very one that had once fired Maya, was now publicly apologizing and adopting new policies. Maya had always believed in the power of forgiveness. She didn't hold animosity towards her former employer. She had learned that true healing comes from letting go of the past and focusing on what can be done today to build a better future. The company's apology was a sign of growth, and for Maya, that was more than enough. But it didn't end there. Maya saw this as an opportunity to partner with the company to guide them on the path of authentic inclusion. She wasn't looking to extract revenge. What mattered most was the change that could be created from this moment. And so, in an unprecedented move, she signed a partnership with Artonics, working with them to overhaul their corporate culture. Under her guidance, Artonics implemented mandatory diversity and inclusion training, with an emphasis on understanding the importance of natural hair in Black culture. The company also partnered with Maya's organization, donating millions to fund educational programs that promoted diversity, cultural understanding, and self-expression. Maya's influence had not only reshaped an entire company, but also changed the corporate landscape. The idea of a professional workplace, once so tightly defined by rigid standards of appearance, was slowly shifting to embrace the idea that true professionalism came from the work you do, not how you look. In the years that followed, Artonics became a model for other companies on how to embrace diversity and inclusion in all aspects of business. Their transformation wasn't just about correcting past mistakes. It was about creating a future where everyone could bring their authentic selves to work without fear of judgment or discrimination. It was a bold and often difficult step forward, but one that Maya had always known was possible. As she watched the company evolve, Maya couldn't help but reflect on how far she had come. From being fired for her natural hair to helping reshape the world, she had seen firsthand how change was possible, even when the odds seemed insurmountable. And with that thought, she smiled, knowing her journey was far from over. As Maya's influence expanded, so did her responsibility. What began as a fight for the right to wear natural hair had transformed into a broader mission, to reshape societal perceptions of beauty, identity, and equality. But the deeper she went into this fight, the more she realized that this was not just a battle against individual companies. It was a battle against an ingrained system of standards that had been upheld for centuries. In the corporate world, the push for equality wasn't just about appearances. It was about power dynamics and the systems that allowed discriminatory practices to continue. The success of the Crown Act and Maya's work didn't just challenge notions of beauty. It directly challenged the status quo of who was deemed worthy of success in the workplace. And as Maya's efforts became more visible, they began to have a ripple effect in other sectors, from fashion to media to government. One of the biggest shifts was in the media. The story of Maya's struggle was picked up by major news outlets, and the conversation about natural hair and racial discrimination moved from being a niche discussion to a mainstream topic. Major magazines began to feature Black women with natural hairstyles on their covers. The beauty industry began to evolve too, with more products catering specifically to Black hair and promoting inclusivity. Maya was invited to speak at panels alongside executives from some of the world's biggest brands. She was often asked how to engage employees on the issue of diversity. Her answer was always the same. It starts with empathy and understanding that people are not a monolith. What works for one person may not work for another, but respect is universal. Her perspective was shifting the way companies thought about employee well-being. It wasn't just about policies, it was about the culture that those policies created. Maya advocated for a culture of open dialogue and listening to employees, especially those from marginalized backgrounds. She knew that real progress came from creating spaces where people felt heard and respected, not just where policies were enforced on paper. At the same time, Maya started to mentor younger activists and entrepreneurs. She wanted to ensure that her legacy wasn't just about the laws she helped pass, but also about the individuals she could inspire to continue the fight. She spent time teaching young women and men the importance of standing firm in their identity, even in the face of opposition. Her message was simple: stand up for who you are, even when the world tells you that you're not good enough. She reminded them that every step they took toward acceptance and inclusivity was one step closer to a society where everyone could thrive, no matter their appearance. She encouraged them to speak out for those who couldn't speak for themselves, to take up space, and to embrace their unique beauty. But as Maya's platform grew, so did the backlash. She was criticized by those who believed that the emphasis on appearance was detracting from the real issues facing marginalized communities. They accused her of watering down the conversation and focusing on a trivial matter instead of more pressing issues like economic disparities, healthcare, or police brutality. Maya, however, never saw the fight for self-expression and the fight for justice as separate battles. For her, they were intricately linked. She understood that societal structures that devalued one group's humanity often found ways to diminish them in many other aspects of life. The fight for natural hair rights was not just a fight about hair. It was about identity, freedom, and the right to live authentically. She'd often say, when a person is free to express who they are, when they're no longer oppressed by appearance-based discrimination, they have the freedom to thrive in other areas of life. If we don't let people feel seen and heard in the smallest aspects of their being, how can we expect them to thrive in the larger aspects? In the face of this growing criticism, Maya leaned into her conviction. She was no stranger to adversity, and she knew that true progress was never easy or neat. The more people opposed her, the more her resolve strengthened. After all, she had experienced firsthand what it was like to be forced to hide her authentic self just to survive in a corporate world that didn't value her. But now, she had the platform and the power to change that narrative. Her work began to impact policy on a global scale. Several other countries followed the U.S. in passing their own versions of the Crown Act. Maya's advocacy led to international conversations about beauty standards, especially in places where cultural norms had been used as a tool of oppression for generations. In many countries, laws were passed that protected employees from discrimination based on their natural hair. What had once been seen as a controversial issue was now widely accepted as a basic human right. But as Maya was making waves globally, things were beginning to change at Artonics, her former employer. The company, which had once been on the forefront of business, was now struggling. The impact of its past mistakes had caught up with them. Their reputation had been tarnished by the controversial firing of Maya and the subsequent public outcry. For years, Artonics had tried to recover, but the damage was done. In many ways, the company's collapse was inevitable. Their inability to adapt to the evolving cultural landscape had alienated their employees and customers alike. Employees who had once been loyal now found themselves questioning the integrity of a company that had failed to live up to its values. Meanwhile, competitors who had embraced the shift toward inclusion and diversity flourished. Companies that valued authenticity, transparency, and inclusion began to lead the market, setting the stage for a new wave of business practices. Maya's journey had come full circle. The company that had fired her for being herself had crumbled under the weight of its own insistence on outdated standards. And the woman they had once rejected had reshaped the world. As Artonics continued to falter, the world around Maya flourished. Her vision, once seen as an isolated cause, had become a global movement. More than just the passing of laws like the Crown Act, it was the mindset shift that Maya had inspired in people from all walks of life. Acceptance of natural beauty had expanded far beyond corporate spaces. People from every corner of society were beginning to take ownership of their identity in ways that were previously unimaginable. Maya became a symbol of resilience. She had turned the pain of her rejection into a source of power that would touch the hearts of millions. She could see that the world was now listening, and this was just the beginning. She had no intention of stopping here. But the next phase of her journey was more than just legislation. It was about creating a sustainable culture, a culture that could stand the test of time. She knew that change wasn't just about passing laws or altering corporate policies. It was about deeply ingraining these values into the very fabric of society. Maya believed in a future where every individual could go through their daily lives without facing discrimination based on their appearance, without worrying about being unfairly treated for being true to themselves. Maya used her platform to speak to young activists who were also leading movements in other realms, whether it was for economic equality, gender rights, or immigrant rights. She encouraged them to understand that their struggles were intertwined. In her eyes, no one could win until everyone won. This solidarity led to a series of collaborations between grassroots activists across the world, all united by the common goal of creating a society where no one would ever feel forced to hide who they were. One such collaboration was with Amina, a young Muslim woman from London who had faced constant discrimination because of her hijab. Amina's story resonated with Maya, as she understood the weight of having your appearance used against you to justify your exclusion. Together, they launched a campaign called Express Yourself, which not only called for the right to wear natural hair, but also for the right to express religious and cultural identities freely in every aspect of life. Their campaign had incredible success in both Europe and the Middle East. As part of the movement, they advocated for religious attire to be accepted alongside cultural norms in schools, workplaces, and public spaces. What Maya and Amina had created wasn't just a campaign. It was a global movement toward embracing the beauty of diverse identities. Meanwhile, back in the U.S., Arc'teryx continued to bleed employees, many of whom had stood in solidarity with Maya during her fight. They could no longer justify working for a company that had failed to evolve. Some employees, who had witnessed firsthand how destructive it could be to suppress a person's identity, began speaking out about their own experiences with discrimination at work. Maya was not the only person whose voice was now heard. She had opened the floodgates for many others to tell their stories. People began sharing their own stories of discrimination based on their hair, their skin color, their religion, and even their gender identity. The sense of empowerment in these individuals was palpable. What had once been whispers in corners of the workplace or among friends had now become loud and undeniable truths. Maya's next step was to create a digital platform, a safe space where people could share their stories and find resources to fight workplace discrimination. She called it Crown Speak, a name that reflected the strength of one's identity and the power of their voice. Crown Speak allowed individuals to share their stories, offer support to each other, and even connect with legal advisors if they needed help challenging discriminatory practices. It became a beacon of hope for many who felt isolated or overwhelmed by the weight of societal expectations. Through Crown Speak, Maya helped foster a global conversation that stretched far beyond the confines of corporate policies. In the meantime, Arc'teryx competitors, once seen as lagging behind in the diversity race, were now reaping the rewards of their commitment to inclusivity. While Arc'teryx struggled to keep its head above water, companies that had embraced diversity and authenticity were thriving. Many of these companies had thrived not only in profits, but in the loyalty of their customers and employees. They had learned that embracing diversity wasn't just the right thing to do, it was the smart thing to do. Maya watched as investors began to recognize the importance of diversity as a key indicator of a company's future success. Businesses that failed to adapt to the changing cultural landscape now faced a decline in profitability. The market had shifted its focus. Companies with progressive diversity policies were seen as more innovative and forward-thinking. As Arc'teryx continued to struggle, it was clear that its inability to evolve had caused its downfall. The company was still mired in the old ways of thinking, and that was precisely what led to its collapse. Its failure to listen to the changing tides of culture had left it vulnerable to competitors who not only understood the power of inclusivity, but also the strength that came with being authentically aligned with modern values. Yet even as Arc'teryx crumbled, Maya's influence spread like wildfire. She continued her work, not just as a change maker, but as a visionary leader who had shown the world that transformation didn't need to come from the top. It could come from individuals who were courageous enough to stand for what was right, no matter the consequences. In the end, Maya's victory wasn't just about her own personal journey. It was about the thousands of other voices who now felt empowered to demand respect, demand change, and most importantly, demand authenticity in the workplace and beyond. Years after Maya's fight and Artonic's downfall, the corporate landscape was drastically different. The culture shift Maya had fought for had evolved into something truly remarkable. Her work had paved the way for policies and norms where employees from all backgrounds felt that their identities were valued and celebrated, rather than stifled. This was no longer just about changing rules. It had become a fundamental rethinking of what it meant to be truly inclusive. Companies that once considered diversity and inclusion as just a box to check now embrace these values as part of their core mission. Talent retention skyrocketed, and employee morale was at an all-time high, proving that when people could show up to work as their true selves, productivity soared. This new wave of inclusivity also saw companies adopting flexible dress codes, giving employees the freedom to wear their hair naturally, to express their cultural identities without fear of judgment. Maya had become a global advocate for corporate accountability, but more than that, she had become a symbol of empowerment for every marginalized individual fighting to be seen for who they truly were. It wasn't just about hair. It was about human dignity and the fight to be treated with the same respect, regardless of where you came from or how you chose to present yourself to the world. Her name had become synonymous with justice, and she was regularly invited to speak at conferences, universities, and even UN panels, where she continued to emphasize the importance of holistic change. In her speeches, she often spoke about the intersectionality of identity. It was not just about hair, nor was it just about race. It was about creating a world where every person could thrive, regardless of their background or the aspects of themselves that society often tried to suppress. But Maya's journey wasn't just about becoming a public figure. It was deeply personal. Despite her rise to global fame, she never lost sight of the grassroots efforts that had made her story possible. She made sure to keep in touch with the people who had supported her in the darkest days of her journey, the ones who had shown up when it mattered the most. True change came, she believed, when individuals were able to uplift each other and stand together. Her message was clear. You are enough, exactly as you are. This principle spread like wildfire. Young women across the world embraced their natural beauty. The once taboo subjects of natural hair and self-expression were now embraced in both corporate spaces and cultural norms. Maya, through her years of tireless work, had managed to shift global perspectives to remind society that the true value of a person lies in the richness of their identity, not in the shape of their hair, the color of their skin, or the way they chose to dress. As Maya moved forward in her mission, she realized that even though Artonic's had collapsed, there were still more battles to be fought. There were still systemic barriers to dismantle, still unequal opportunities to confront. The workplace had changed, but there were still gaps in education, in healthcare, in access to economic opportunity for people of color and other marginalized groups. Maya's legacy became one of empowerment and resilience. She had turned an injustice into a revolution. But it wasn't a revolution based on anger. It was one rooted in the purest form of strength, the ability to stay true to oneself, even in the face of adversity. She inspired countless people to continue the fight, to speak out, and to never compromise on their authenticity. Artonic's, in its final years, tried to salvage its reputation with half-hearted attempts at diversity programs, but it was clear that the damage had already been done. The company's collapse was not merely a financial one. It was a moral one, a consequence of its refusal to embrace change and treat people with respect. Maya, in contrast, had built something much more powerful than any company. She had created a movement that transcended corporate interests. It wasn't about money or fame. It was about something far more meaningful, the restoration of human dignity. And this was where Maya found her true sense of fulfillment. As the years went by, Maya continued to lead the fight for a more inclusive future, but she did so with a sense of peace. She had won more than just a personal victory. She had sparked a global awakening. Her story had resonated with people across the world, and her legacy would live on for generations to come. In a world that still faces many challenges, Maya's journey reminded everyone that change is possible. No matter how difficult the fight may seem, no matter how oppressive the system, transformation starts with one person who dares to challenge the status quo. And Maya had done just that. She had changed the world.